It was just after 6 p.m., the time she usually texted to say she was on her way home. But that evening, my phone rang instead. Her name lit up the screen, and I answered with the same easy familiarity I always had. Her voice came through, but it wasn't the warm, tired tone I expected. It was brisk, clipped, like she was reading lines she'd rehearsed. She told me the ER was chaos tonight, that multiple traumas had come in, and she'd be staying for hours beyond her shift. I pictured her in the bright hospital lights, moving fast between patients, her hair tucked neatly under a cap, her hands steady even under pressure. I told her I understood, that I'd keep dinner warm. She thanked me quickly, almost too quickly, before saying she had to go. The call ended, but something about it didn't sit right. The quiet in the kitchen grew heavy, like the walls themselves were listening to my thoughts. My eyes drifted to my phone again. We'd turned on location, sharing years ago, back when it was about safety and closeness, not suspicion. I hesitated, thumb hovering above the screen. I told myself I wasn't checking because I didn't trust her. I was just curious if she'd gotten stuck at the smaller urgent care facility instead of the main hospital. One tap, and the map appeared. My heart stumbled. The little blued, that was me, sat at our home, but her location pin was nowhere near the hospital. It was on the other side of the city, perfectly still, as if it had been there for a while. I blinked, zooming in, expecting to see a clinic, maybe a pharmacy, anything that made sense. But the street names told another story. A quiet commercial strip with a handful of shops and a hotel. A sharp, cold pressure formed in my chest. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe she stopped to grab supplies. Maybe she was helping a friend. Maybe the word maybe felt like a lifeline I kept trying to grip, but it was slipping fast. The vegetables on the cutting board sat forgotten. My hand went to the car keys without thinking, my pulse thundering in my ears. I didn't know exactly what I would find, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Once I saw the truth, I could never unsee it. And so, I stepped out into the night, the screen still glowing in my hand, the pin on the map pulling me into a story I never wanted to live. If you've ever laid next to someone who made you feel completely alone, then maybe this story isn't just mine, it's ours. And if that's true, subscribe. Because stories like this deserve to be heard by those who understand. The engine roared to life, but it was my pulse that truly drowned out every other sound. Streetlights streaked across the windshield in brief, blinding flashes, each one catching a reflection of my own eyes in the glass. Wide, unblinking, haunted by the shape of a question I was terrified to answer. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than I realized, knuckles paling, muscles locked like I was bracing for an impact I couldn't see yet. The GPS on my phone glowed in the cup holder, her pin unmoving, patient, like it knew I was coming. I told myself to slow down, to think rationally, to imagine her explanation before I imagined her betrayal. But the truth is, I was afraid if I slowed down I might turn back, and I'd rather face a nightmare than live in doubt. The city blurred past me, familiar roads suddenly feeling foreign, like I was driving into a place where the rules I'd known, trust, love, safety, no longer applied. My mind kept replaying her voice from the earlier call, every pause, every careful choice of words. It sounded like someone who was afraid of being overheard, or maybe someone who wanted me to believe a version of events she'd crafted in advance. I hit a red light just before the final turn. The glow of the signal cast a harsh, blood-red wash over the car's interior, and in that eerie light, I glanced down at the hotel's name displayed on the map. I'd driven past it dozens of times without ever noticing it before. Just another anonymous building in the city's background. But tonight, it was the center of my universe, pulling me in with the gravity of a black hole. The light turned green, and I pressed the gas slowly, not because I wanted to delay, but because I suddenly realized the moment I saw her, if she was there, would be the moment our marriage crossed a line it could never step back from. And deep down, a part of me was still whispering, please, let me be wrong. Yet with each yard I closed, that whisper was being drowned out by something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous. The need to know. I turned into the narrow street leading to the hotel, headlights bouncing off the rows of parked cars, scanning for hers like a predator searching for prey. And then I saw it that I don't care about algorithms. I care about the people listening to this who are bleeding silently like I did. If you've ever held back tears just to protect someone who didn't protect you, subscribe. You don't have to do this alone anymore. The cold air hit me like a slap the moment I stepped out of the car, the kind that makes your breath visible in sharp, uneven clouds. My footsteps felt heavier than they should have, each one pulling me closer to a truth that felt more like a trap than an answer. The hotel's glass doors reflected me back in distorted fragments. My face pale, my jaw tight, my eyes darkened with a mix of fear and fury I barely recognized as my own. I paused just short of the entrance, my hand resting on the cool metal of the handle. This was the threshold between suspicion and certainty. Once I crossed it, there would be no maybe left to hide behind. Through the revolving door, I could see the lobby lit in warm tones, a strange contrast to the ice running through my veins. The receptionist looked up briefly from behind the counter, her eyes flicking over me as if she already knew I didn't belong here, like she could read the storm I was carrying. My ears caught faint laughter echoing from somewhere beyond the hallway to the right, laughter that didn't belong to the sterile quiet of a hospital ward. My heart surged in my chest. Every sound seemed amplified. The low hum of an elevator, the rhythmic clicking of heels on polished tile, the faint scent of perfume that didn't match the sterile, chemical trace of the scrubs she claimed to be wearing in the ER. I walked to the desk, my voice low but steady when I asked if she had checked in under her name. The receptionist hesitated, her polite smile faltering, and in that pause I felt the last of my fragile hope splinter. She didn't have to confirm it with words. The flicker in her eyes was enough. I turned before she could ask questions, following the muffled voices down the carpeted hallway. Each step felt like walking through water, my muscles tight, my senses sharpened to a painful edge. I passed doors with gold-plated numbers, each one a possible hiding place for the life I thought we shared. Then, halfway down the hall, I froze. A door opened just slightly ahead, and for a heartbeat, I caught a glimpse, a silhouette I knew better than my own, her hair falling over her shoulder in a way I had traced 1,000 times. And then, beside her, the unmistakable shape of a man's arm sliding around her waist, pulling her back inside. The door clicked shut before my brain could catch up with my eyes. My pulse roared in my ears, my vision narrowing as my hand reached for the doorknob without thinking. But I stopped, fingers trembling inches from it, realizing that opening this door would not just confirm betrayal. It would shatter the last remnants of the life I thought I had. I stood there, breathing hard, my knuckles brushing the wood, and wondered if she had any idea I was this close. If she knew that I could hear the muffled sound of her voice on the other side, soft, intimate, nothing like the tone she used when she told me she was working late. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. Maybe I wasn't ready to hear what she would say if she saw me. Maybe the truth was about to be worse than I had ever imagined. I don't remember deciding to knock. My hand moved before my brain could form the thought, and the sound echoed through the hallway like a gunshot in a church. 3 sharp raps on the door, each one carrying the weight of sleepless nights, unanswered questions, and every "I love you" I now wondered if she ever meant. Silence followed, thick and suffocating, but not empty. I could hear the faint rustle of movement inside, the muffled exchange of voices, hers low and urgent, his deeper, steady, almost careless. My body went rigid, every muscle straining to catch more of their words, but the carpet and the door swallowed most of the sound. The seconds stretched like hours until I heard footsteps approach. The latch clicked. The door cracked open just enough for a sliver of light to spill into the dim hallway. And then there she was, my wife, still in scrubs, but not the clean, sterile kind she wore when coming from the hospital. They were rumpled, the neckline slightly stretched, and her hair, usually tied neatly under a surgical cap, was loose, falling around her face like she had just been somewhere else entirely. Her eyes widened when she saw me, shock flaring before something colder slid into place, like a mask snapping on. "W, what are you doing here?" she whispered, as if the hallway itself could judge her. I searched her face for the woman I thought I knew, but found only a stranger wearing her skin. My gaze flicked past her shoulder, and in that fraction of a second I saw him, a man in a half-buttoned dress shirt, standing too close to the bed, his expression unreadable, but his presence impossible to misinterpret. I didn't answer her question. My voice, when it came, was low, steady, and nothing like the way I used to speak to her. "Why don't you tell me?" The words hung there, a challenge and a plea in one. But she didn't take either. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her hand moved to close the door. I stepped forward, blocking it with my foot. The tension between us was so sharp, it could have cut through bone. She glanced back at him, and that single nervous look told me more than any confession ever could. My stomach turned, not from surprise, but from the sick confirmation that every late-night doubt, every overtime shift, every emergency was never about the hospital at all. We stood there, inches apart, in the quiet war of people who used to love each other. I could feel the truth pressing against my chest like it wanted to break free, but I didn't give it the satisfaction. Not yet. Not here. Not with him standing behind her. I took a step back, letting the door close, the sound of the latch sliding home, sealing not just a room, but something much bigger. The end of the person I thought she was. And as I walked down that hallway, my hands shaking, I realized the worst part wasn't that she lied. It was that she didn't even look sorry, and that, more than anything, was going to haunt me. The hallway felt longer than it had moments before. Every step a slow march away from the life I thought I was living. The carpet muted my footsteps, but my heartbeat was a drum in my ears, heavy and unrelenting. My body moved on autopilot, left foot, right foot, but my mind was replaying every second I had just witnessed, slowing them down, dissecting them, poisoning me with details I couldn't unsee. Her face when she opened the door, the way she glanced back at him, the casual arrogance in his stance. It was like watching a puzzle I had been struggling with suddenly snap into place. But instead of satisfaction, all I felt was sickness. I reached the elevator, pressed a button, and waited as the digital numbers counted down, each one stabbing me with the thought, she's not alone in there. I picture them speaking in hushed voices now, maybe laughing about the way I showed up, maybe arguing about whether I believe whatever story she'd come up with next. My fists clenched, not in rage, but in a desperate attempt to hold myself together. Anger was clean. It had edges you could grasp. But this was a hollow, shapeless ache that seeped into everything. The elevator door slid open, and I stepped inside, alone in a small box that suddenly felt like confessional. The mirrored walls reflected a man I barely recognized. Eyes dark, jaw tight, shoulders hunched forward like he was bracing for impact. I stared at myself and thought, this is the moment you stop being her husband in your heart, even if it's still on paper. The doors closed and the hum of the descent filled the silence, but in my head, I could still hear the echo of her voice asking, "What are you doing here?" The lobby was warm, but it felt cold to me. The desk clerk looked up briefly, probably wondering why I was leaving so soon, but I didn't stop, didn't explain. I pushed through the glass doors and into the night, the air hitting me like a slap. I inhaled deeply, hoping the coolness would steady me. But all it did was remind me of the scent in that hallway, a faint trace of her perfume mixed with something that didn't belong to our life together. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your own thoughts louder. I walked with no destination in mind, only the need to put distance between myself and that door, between myself and the truth I wasn't ready to face fully. But the problem with distance is that it doesn't erase. It only delays. Every step forward was also a step deeper into realization that when I eventually stopped walking, I'd have to decide what came next. And in that moment, I didn't know if I wanted answers, revenge, or just a numbness to last a little longer. I reached the corner and paused under the dim glow of a streetlight. Pulling my phone from my pocket, my thumb hovered over her contact name, the picture of her smiling at the beach staring back at me. I thought about calling, about confronting her, while the image of him in her room was still burning fresh in my mind. But I didn't. Not yet. Because some part of me knew, the moment I heard her voice again, I'd have to face the reality that nothing she said could undo what I'd just seen. And as I stood there, the city stretching endlessly in front of me, I realized something else. Maybe I wasn't walking away from her at all. Maybe, for the first time in a long time, I was walking toward myself. The city seemed to pulse under the faint orange glow of the streetlights, but I barely noticed the rhythm of life around me. My mind was still trapped several floors above, behind a door that had closed too quickly. Each passing car, each distant sound of laughter from strangers, only seemed to mock the silence I carried inside. My hands were shoved deep into my pockets, not because of the cold, but because I was afraid of what they might do if I let them hang free, afraid of the impulse to turn back, to pound on that door until she answered, until she was forced to see what her lies had done to me. But instead, I kept moving. My shoes scuffed against the pavement in a slow, dragging rhythm, like I was testing the strength of every step. I didn't know where I was headed, but I knew it had to be far enough that her perfume wouldn't linger in my senses anymore. Far enough that I could almost believe the hotel, the man, the look in her eyes. None of it had happened. I stopped at an all-night diner, not because I was hungry, but because the neon sign promised some kind of refuge. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in, and the waitress behind the counter gave me the kind of polite half-smile reserved for people who look like they've just come from a funeral. I slid into a booth, the vinyl cold against my back, and stared at the menu without reading a single word. That's when my phone buzzed again. Her name lit up the screen, the little heart emoji I'd put there years ago still stubbornly in place. I didn't answer. I watched the call ring out, then watched as her text came through seconds later. "Where are you? I need to talk." My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but I couldn't bring myself to type. I imagined her pacing in that hotel room, maybe alone now, maybe not. Was she rehearsing her apology? Or was she crafting a lie so perfect it could almost pass for truth? The waitress came over with a coffee I hadn't ordered, setting it down gently like she knew it was the only thing keeping me tethered to this booth. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into my skin, and stare at the swirling reflection of the overhead light in the black liquid. It was a kind of moment where the world feels like it stopped spinning, but you know it hasn't. You just stepped off, and now you're watching it go on without you. Outside, the streets were quieter now. The night was settling in, heavy and patient. I knew I couldn't hide here forever. At some point, I'd have to face her. At some point, I'd have to hear her voice explain the unexplainable. But for now, I took another sip of coffee, leaned back against the booth, and let the bitter taste remind me that sometimes the truth isn't sharp. It's slow, creeping, and it seeps in until there's no part of you it hasn't touched. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a single thought kept looping, quiet but relentless. When I walk out of here, I'll have to decide whether I'm going home or whether I'm never going back at all. If this sounds like your life, stop pretending you're fine. Stop hiding it like I did. Subscribe, not for me, but for every person who thought they were crazy until the truth finally shattered them. You're safe here. We see you. I left the diner when the coffee had gone cold, not because I was ready to face her, but because sitting still made me feel like I was suffocating. The air outside was sharper now, carrying that quiet on the city when most of it has settled into sleep. I walked without direction, each step pulling me further from the version of my life I thought was still intact. Every street lamp I passed threw my shadow ahead of me, tall, stretched, and unfamiliar, like I was following someone I didn't recognize. I pulled out my phone more times than I could count, each time seeing her name on the last unanswered message, each time locking the screen before I could type anything. I wanted to storm into that hotel, to demand the truth with such force that she couldn't hide behind rehearsed excuses. But I also knew the truth wasn't going to fix anything. The truth would only take the last bit of her I'd been clinging to and rip it away completely. So I didn't call. I didn't text. I just kept walking, weaving through streets I'd never really noticed before, past late-night bars spilling light and laughter onto the sidewalk, past shuttered storefronts that seemed to echo my own silence. At one intersection, I stopped and looked up at a red light that held me there longer than it should have. In that moment, I realized something that hurt worse than the betrayal itself. I wasn't afraid of losing her. I was afraid of losing the version of me that existed when I still believed her. I thought about what it would look like if I went home right now. Her waiting on the couch, maybe still in her scrubs, maybe changed into something softer, her voice trying to sound small and sorry. I imagined her reaching for my hand, her eyes searching mine for a crack, a sign she could still get through. And I imagined myself pulling away, not out of anger, but because I'd finally accepted that some distances can't be closed, no matter how much history you built together. The night kept swallowing blocks, the quiet wrapping tighter around me. I ended up near the river, the water glinting under the faint moonlight. I leaned on the railing and watched the ripples break apart the reflections of the city skyline, wondering if this was what love looked like when it was dying. Once beautiful, now fractured beyond repair, still shimmering in places but impossible to piece back together. Behind me, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail this time. I didn't listen. I couldn't. Not yet. Because once I pressed play, the confrontation would begin, whether I spoke or not. And I wasn't ready for it. Not tonight. Tonight, the silence felt safer than her voice. And deep down, I knew that when the confrontation finally came, it wouldn't just be about her in that hotel. It would be about every night, every shift, every excuse that had chipped away at what we once were. I pushed the phone back into my pocket, kept my eyes on the water, and told myself I'd decide tomorrow. But even as I thought it, I knew tomorrow would bring a choice I'd been avoiding for far too long. The next morning, sunlight pushed its way through the blinds, but it didn't bring clarity, only the reminder that another day had arrived, and with it, the decision I promised myself I'd make. I sat at the edge of the bed, my phone heavy in my hand. Her voicemail icon glared at me like an unopened wound. My thumb hovered over the play button for what felt like hours. When I finally tapped it, her voice spilled into the room. Too bright, too practiced. She said she'd gotten caught up at the hospital, that she'd fallen asleep in the on-call room, that she hoped I wasn't overthinking things. But underneath every carefully chosen word, I could hear the strain, the way her breathing caught before certain phrases, the hesitation that didn't belong to someone telling the truth. I didn't call her back. Instead, I drove. I didn't even know where I was headed until I found myself pulling into the street near the hotel. It stood there in the daylight, looking almost harmless, stripped of the secrecy it held the night before. I sat in the car, watching the entrance, wondering if I'd see her walk out, wondering if that would be the final nail in the coffin, or just another piece of a puzzle I already knew by heart. The truth is, I wasn't looking for proof anymore. Proof had been piling up for months, in the missed calls, in the half-smiles that didn't reach her eyes, in the way her laughter seemed louder when it came from the other side of a closed door. The GPS location was just the latest receipt in a growing list of unpaid debts between us. And I knew then that the confrontation I'd been avoiding wasn't going to save us. It was only going to bury what little was left. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened, my mind running through every possible version of the ending. Me walking away without a word, me asking questions I already had the answers to, me watching her crumble under the weight of her own lies. Or worse, watching her stand tall and unapologetic. In the end, I chose none of them. I started the car, pulled away from the curb, and let the hotel shrink in the rear-view mirror. But leaving didn't feel like closure. It felt like pressing pause on a story that had already reached its final chapter. The silence between us was now louder than her laughter used to be, heavier than any truth she could confess. And as I drove with no destination, I realized the confrontation might never come. Not because I was too afraid to face her, but because she no longer deserved the privilege of my voice. Some stories don't end with a door slam or shouted words. Some just fade, slowly, painfully, until all that's left is a quiet acknowledgement that love, once broken, doesn't mend in the same shape. And as the miles stretched out before me, I knew that whatever came next, it wouldn't be us that you've come this far. That means something. You felt this. You lived it. Maybe not this exact story, but your own version of it. So if you're still here, still breathing under the weight of something they'll never apologize for, hit subscribe. Because no one should walk through this kind of betrayal alone. And if no one else says it, I will. I'm glad you're still here.